So today in Commonwealth of Pennsylvania v. Kimberly Baylor, we made a decision that goes to the heart of why that case matters and what it's really about. Because this is a case about a very fine line, the line between protected speech and criminal harassment. This morning, we waived Kimmy Baylor's right to a jury trial. And we did it deliberately because this case doesn't turn on emotional views of the evidence. It turns on a very nuanced legal issue. And in fact, an issue that gets to the core of your constitutional rights under the First Amendment. The Pennsylvania Attorney General's office has charged Kimmy with 18 counts of harassment. Now, that harassment was not against a private citizen. It was against a government office, specifically the Lebanon County, Pennsylvania District Attorney's Office. And why? Because Kimmy thought that the district attorney of Lebanon County, Pierre Hess, was making poor charging decisions, particularly charging decisions that affected the rights of women and her friend, Veronica Celeste Rodriguez. Now, for those of you who have been following Veronica's case, she was charged with Wiretap Act violations and making false reports to law enforcement after she used her smartphone to audio record herself being raped by another service member in the Pennsylvania National Guard. When Kimmy called to complain, she was persistent, she was aggressive, and she was not polite. But she was engaged in political speech directed at a government agency. And those facts bring this case into focus because the First Amendment protects your right to petition the government. Not just once, not just politely, and not just in a way that preserves the comfort of government officials like Pierre Hess. It protects persistent speech. It protects critical speech, and it even protects speech that makes government actors uncomfortable. And just yesterday, we saw those principles be reinforced by the U.S. Supreme Court. Earlier this week, the United States Supreme Court unanimously allowed the case to move forward involving a street preacher who had been arrested while expressing his views in public. The court made it clear that he cannot be forced to choose between staying silent or risking prosecution simply to exercise what he believes is constitutionally protected speech. And that is the backdrop under which Kimmy is being prosecuted. The critical question that we hope to clear up with this case is not whether Kimmy's speech was welcome. It pretty clearly wasn't. The question is, when does that kind of speech cross the line into criminal harassment? Under Pennsylvania law, harassment requires that the conduct serve no legitimate purpose. That is a very important element of the offense that tends to merge with Kimmy's First Amendment rights. Because Kimmy had a purpose. She was protesting government action. And from our perspective, it wasn't just any purpose. It was a constitutionally protected purpose. If a political protest is not a legitimate purpose, then either the statute is being misapplied or it was unconstitutional as it was applied. If a political protest is not a legitimate purpose for placing a phone call, even an angry phone call, I don't know what is. This case also has problems with vagueness, because the Pennsylvania harassment statute doesn't tell you where the line is. Every day, we encourage people to call their representatives to make their opinions known about policies. We encourage civic engagement. We teach people to speak out. In fact, from a very young age, we teach our children that principle. If you have more than one child, you've seen it. When conflict arises, the first thing you say is, don't use your fists, use your words. That's not just parenting. That's a foundational rule of good behavior. We handle disputes through speech, not force. But that principle only works if people know where the line is. If using your words can expose you to criminal liability, if people don't know when speech crosses from lawful protest into unlawful conduct, then the rule breaks down. So where is the line? 5 calls? 50? 500? The statute doesn't say. And as I sit here today, we don't know. When the law doesn't give people clear notice of what's prohibited, that's a constitutional problem. And this is why we chose a bench trial. Because we need a judge to answer these questions clearly and to put the answers to these questions on paper. If there is a conviction, we need detailed findings. Did Kimmy have a legitimate purpose? Does political protest qualify? And how vociferously can you express your opinions before your speech crosses the line from political protest into criminal harassment? It is very likely that this case is going to go to the Pennsylvania appellate courts. And before it does, we need the trial level courts in Pennsylvania to force these issues. And there's a broader issue at stake here that seems very important for the times that we're living in. And I need to be precise about it. Before I became a lawyer, I worked in counterterrorism and counterinsurgency. A theme that appeared over and over again in that work was that stable systems depend on lawful outlets for dissent. Open societies tend to have less violence because they provide nonviolent channels for opposition, speech, protest, civic participation. When those channels exist, people use them. But when those channels become unclear, When people don't know whether speech is protected or punishable, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty in that space is not healthy for a functioning democracy. It can cause a liberal constitutional republic to backslide into anocracy and autocracy. And it can cause people to eschew political speech altogether in favor of political violence. So let's bring this back to Kimmy Baylor. She didn't threaten anyone. She didn't commit violence. She picked up the phone and she protested the government. She did it repeatedly, she did it persistently, and yes, at times, she was downright rude. But was it criminal? I certainly don't think so. We need to know where the line is. Where does protected speech end and criminal harassment begin? Because if persistent, critical, or even abusive speech directed at the government can be turned into a crime, then the line isn't clear. And if the line isn't clear, it's not really a line at all. And that is the question that this case is going to force the Pennsylvania courts to answer, not just for Kimmy, but for anyone who wants to speak out and needs to know where the boundaries are.